Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you want to see how I duped a Big Lots piece of fall home decor for less than half price using Dollar Tree supplies, just keep watching. For this project, we're going to need two black plastic wire baskets from Dollar Tree. One's oval and one was a rectangular shape. I'm going to begin by removing the tag from the oval basket, as this is going to be the base of our project. I just use my wire cutters. Scissors will also work to remove the tag. Then I just slightly bent in the basket a little, just to make it a little more narrow. Then with some of my galvanized wire that I got from Dollarama, it's a bit thicker of a wire, thicker than floral wire. You may have to find some at your local hardware store if you can't find the thick floral wire that Dollar Tree sells, and the color won't matter at this point as we're going to spray paint the end product. So I took out a length of wire and used my wire cutters to cut it off. My piece was about 1.5 to 2 feet long. It's better to cut on the larger side than the smaller side, as you can always cut it down. Then I straightened out one of the ends and stuck it into one of the top openings of the basket at the longer or the more narrow end, and then just use some Dollar Tree or possibly Dollarama wire benders, jewelry pliers, small needle nose pliers, just to bend the wire onto the basket. And I clipped off the remaining with my wire cutters so that there were no sharp ends pointing out. Then using my hands, I went up along the wire and just slightly bent it into a pumpkin, the top of a pumpkin looking shape. So kind of just went over one hump and then made kind of a V in the center, and then made a symmetrical hump on the other side, and then back down to the opposite side of the basket where we had attached the wire. We're going to attach the end onto the opposite side, doing the same technique. Just put it through the wire where it's roughly even across from the first spot you inserted it. That's what you can see me doing here to make sure I like the height and it's looking centered. Then I'll attach it onto the end of the basket by weaving it into the top opening and then wrapping it around with the needle nose pliers and cutting off any remaining ends with the wire cutters so that, again, nothing sharp is poking out. Once you have it fully attached and you're happy with the shape of your pumpkin form that you've just created, you're going to repeat this process one more time and attach it on to the other side of the basket so that you have two parallel shapes. This is a sped up version of me adding on the second wire. If you're confused at all from watching it in fast speed, I highly recommend you going back and listening to my explanation where it's a bit slower in the beginning. Attaching your second piece of wire on, you will want to keep it as evenly spaced as possible. I counted roughly 4 to 5 diamond shapes of the basket on each side so that they were as evenly spaced on either side as possible. This done, we set it aside and move on to the rectangular basket. I just used my wire cutters and cut off the top lip of the basket, and then repeated the same process around the bottom, using my wire cutters to remove the bottom from the middle section of the basket. The middle section of the basket now off of the bottom and the top rim, I'm just stretching it out to make it a little more even. The top side of the basket, because it was an angled shape, was a little more wide than the bottom, so I'm more stretching out the bottom just so it is pretty much straight and not really angled anymore. Next, I took my wire cutters and cut through the tube to make it into one long strip. I gave the long piece one last stretch and flattened it out just to make it nice and easy to work with while we are going to attach it onto the wire pieces we made in the previous step. I luckily had some of these small black zip ties on hand from Dollar Tree. They came in a pack of small black and medium red ones. It really doesn't matter what color zip ties you're going to use, again, because we are going to spray paint it once we've attached the wire all the way around. Holding the long piece of mesh about an inch below the beginning of the top of the basket, I took a zip tie and went through the basket and the long piece of mesh and zip tied them together as close to the galvanized wires that we attached on, doing this on both sides. Try to make sure that when you're adding the zip ties, you're adding them with the long tails in towards the basket. I do feed this one back through and then continue with them in towards the basket. That hides the bulkier part of the zip tie, which just makes it look more neat and clean. Now that the long piece of mesh is attached to the side of the basket, we will begin attaching it up and over the pumpkin form all the way to the other side of the basket. I added zip ties approximately every 2 to 3 inches, give or take. Just attach them as you see necessary so that it's not puckering or bubbling. You want it to lay as flat to the galvanized wires as possible. While you're doing this, you also want to try to keep your galvanized wires as parallel as possible so that they're as evenly spaced apart as possible. It just gives a cleaner look and allows you to have enough mesh covering both sides. This is what your pumpkin form on top of your basket should look like when you have all your long piece of mesh attached to your galvanized wires. It will most likely have overhang, as I'm showing you here, that will most likely be uneven on either side. I just took my wire cutters to trim it down so that there was only about 1/4 inch hanging over the galvanized wire, and then just used my fingers to wrap these pieces around. I will warn you now, maybe use gloves or pliers. I just did it with my hands, and I will say after doing all of it, my fingers, my index fingers mainly, were pretty scratched up, so do please take precaution here. I repeated this process all the way along the front and back side of the wire form to make it neat and clean, and so that there were no sharp pieces hanging out that could cut anyone. The last step in cleaning up the mesh was to trim off the excess overhang that was along the beginning and end of the wire mesh. Just be careful to only cut through the overhanging mesh, the excess stuff, and not right through to your basket. Do this on both sides. Here's what your basket and newly attached pumpkin form should look like. Now I trimmed off the ends of the zip ties with my wire cutters all the way around, and then took it outside to spray paint the piece with a flat black spray paint. Any one you would like will work, just to give it an even, cohesive look so that the galvanized wire that was silver is now black also. I did give it a quick coat all over because the matte spray paint took away the shiny plasticky look of the basket mesh that was originally on there. Next, I took some of this craft wire string that I got from my Dollarama store. I cut a length and folded it in half on itself, about 8 inches long, and then just twisted it together on itself, and then where the open ends were, I started twisting towards the closed end around a screwdriver to make our curly Q for our pumpkin. Separated the 2 ends at the bottom of the curly Q and fed them through 2 spots on the top, slightly over to the side, not quite centered, of the top of the form, and then just twist tied them on to the bottom. I used some regular kitchen aluminum foil and shaped out the stem. I wanted it to be bigger at the base and go more narrow up to the top, so I just squeezed with more pressure the higher up to the tip of the stem that I went. You can shape it and form it pretty much into whatever shape you like. I made mine kind of bend over. I did realize mine was too long, so I did just trim it down with scissors. It was easily to cut off parts at the end and top, and just kept working at it till I was happy with the shape and size I wanted. Next, I took some dollar store black acrylic paint and painted the stem so that it was mostly black. It didn't have to be perfect, as I am going to wrap it with the wire cord, the black wire cord that we used to make the curly Q, but I didn't want so much of the tinfoil silver showing through, so I did want to disguise it a bit. I just pounced it on as best as possible and used my heat tool to dry it. When the stem was dry, I then took the craft wire string that we used to make the curly Q and left out about maybe 3 to 4 inches at the bottom, and then began wrapping it around kind of haphazardly. I didn't want to do it tight because I am going to go back down kind of in the opposite direction and then back up again. I wanted it to kind of be more of a viney, messy look. I didn't want perfection. If that's the look you'd like, by all means go up slowly and use hot glue if you'd like to help keep it in the spots that you want, but I just played around with it and liked the way it was coming along with the messy look I was going for. Once I was done wrapping the stem, I left out another 3 inches or so of cord and just hot glued it lightly to the bottom so that it wouldn't come unraveled. And this is what I will use to attach the stem onto the pumpkin form. I just fed the wires through 2 different spots on the top in the center and then twist tied it at the bottom. I then added some hot glue to help reinforce it. I did this by adding little bits from the top and concealing it under the stem, and then flipped it over and added a little more generous amount of hot glue underneath from the bottom. With the wire pumpkin basket completed, the last part is decorating it. You can do this any way you like. I did it with some floral foam to add height to the candle that I wanted to put in the center. Concealed this with some pieces of hula skirt from Dollar Tree. Raffia also works. And then I just filled it with fall florals and fall embellishments. And that was it. I hope you liked this tutorial, and I hope you think that it's a pretty close dupe. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you like this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with friends who you think might like it also, or leave me a comment in the comment section below. This really helps my channel to grow and lets YouTube know to share this video. If you'd like to check out more of my fall DIYs, I've linked a couple videos coming up in the next screen for you. Thanks for watching. Bye.